In February of 1911, the Goldstein family retreated to their old mountain chalet in Savoy, France, hoping the cold air and silence would help Estelle recover from her deep postpartum depression. 2 weeks later, they were supposed to return. They never did. When villagers hiked up the mountain at the end of March, they didn't just find silence, they found death, and something far colder than the snow. Inside, a frozen diary revealed a descent into paranoia. Children dead, a husband murdered in his sleep, and Estelle hanging in the attic with a twisted bedsheet. What happened during those final days remains one of the most chilling unsolved cases of the French Alps. Before we dive in, hit subscribe for more forgotten cases that were never meant to be uncovered. And tell us in the comments, do you think the mind can survive isolation, or does the silence eventually consume everything? The Goldstein family was well respected in Chabris. Antoine Goldstein had built a modest fortune in the textile industry, establishing himself as a forward-thinking businessman in a rapidly changing France. The Belle Époque was at its height. Paris glittered with electric lights, automobiles rattled down cobblestone streets, and the wealthy enjoyed unprecedented prosperity. But behind the facade of their elegant townhouse on Rue de Boigny, darkness had taken root. Estelle Goldstein had once been known for her vivacious charm and musical talent. The daughter of a Jewish merchant from Lyon, she had captivated Antoine at a summer soiree in 1904. Their courtship was brief but passionate, and within a year they were married. Jacques came first in 1905, followed by Margot in 1907. Their family seemed perfect until the birth of little Lyon in June of 1910. Something changed in Estelle after the third child, recalled Marie Dumont, the Goldsteins' former housekeeper, in a statement to police. She wouldn't hold the baby. She would stare out the window for hours. Sometimes I'd find her in the nursery at night, just standing there, watching the children sleep. Not like a mother watches, like she was searching for something. By December 1910, Antoine had consulted 3 different physicians about his wife's condition. Dr. Henri Belmont, the last doctor to examine Estelle before their fateful trip, wrote in his medical notes, "Patient exhibits classic symptoms of melancholia postpartum. Recommended rest, isolation from urban stressors, and regular doses of Veronal for sleep. The mountain air might prove beneficial." The mountain chalet had been in Antoine's family for generations. Located near the village of Saint-Jean-de-Maurienne, it was originally built as a hunting lodge in the 1840s by Antoine's grandfather, a lumber merchant. The 2-story stone structure was rustic but solid. Thick walls designed to withstand the brutal alpine winters, a large central fireplace. For bedrooms upstairs, and a small attic space accessible by a narrow staircase. A decade had passed since anyone had stayed there for more than a night or two. "Antoine set me up 2 days before to prepare the house," said Claude Moreau, the caretaker who maintained the property. "I chopped wood for 2 weeks, stocked the pantry, made sure the chimney was clear. The place was cold, the kind of cold that never really leaves old stone. But everything was in order when they arrived. On February 3rd, 1911, the Goldstein family departed Chabris by train, then traveled the final 10 kilometers by horse-drawn sleigh. The snowfall had been unusually heavy that winter. Drifts had already accumulated to remarkable heights along the winding mountain paths. "I remember watching them go," said Jean Laurent, their neighbor in Chabris. Little Jacques was excited, bouncing in his seat. Margot was bundled up like a little doll. Antoine was trying to appear cheerful, but there was worry in his eyes. And Estelle, she just stared straight ahead, clutching the baby. I waved, but she didn't wave back. That was the last time anyone from town saw them alive. The first week at the chalet seemed uneventful, according to Antoine's letters. He wrote to his business partner, Pierre Dufour, on February 10th. "The children are enjoying the snow. Jacques is learning to use the small wooden skis I found in the cellar. Estelle seems to be sleeping better, though she still has a little appetite. The isolation is precisely what the doctor ordered. No visitors, no social obligations, just the quiet of the mountains." What Antoine didn't mention in his letter was that the weather had worsened significantly. The region was experiencing what meteorological records would later document as the most severe winter in 30 years. On February 12th, a blizzard descended upon the mountains. dumping nearly a meter of fresh snow overnight. The path connecting the chalet to the nearest village became impassable. In the final letter Antoine would ever write, dated February 15th, his tone had shifted. The snow continues without mercy. We are effectively cut off now until it melts. I've been rationing our supplies, though we have enough to last several weeks if necessary. Estelle has taken to writing in a journal I gave her, a positive development. The doctor said it might help order her thoughts. Still, there is something in her eyes that troubles me. She watches the children with an intensity that seems unnatural. Last night, I woke to find her side of the bed empty. After searching, I discovered her in the attic, sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at the small round window. She claimed she heard something scratching at the glass, though we are 3 stories up and the nearest tree is meters away from the house. This letter never reached its intended recipient. It was found in Antoine's desk drawer months later, stamped and addressed, but never sent. The nearest post office was in the village, unreachable through the mounting snow. What happened next can only be pieced together through the fragmented entries in Estelle's diary and the physical evidence documented when the bodies were discovered. The diary itself became a crucial piece of evidence, though many pages were torn out or rendered illegible by water damage from melting snow that had seeped through the roof. Entry dated February 17th. The silence here is different from the silence in Chabri. City silence is never complete. There's always a distant carriage, a neighbor's voice, the cathedral bells. Here, when the wind stops, the silences wait. It presses against the windows. It listens. Entry dated February 19th. Jacques says he's made a friend, a boy who appears at his window at night. I told him it's impossible. His room is on the 2nd floor. He insisted. The snow is so high now, my man, he said. The boy just climbs up and looks in. Antoine thinks it's just a child's imagination. I'm not so certain. Entry dated February 21st. Antoine doesn't hear it. The scratching in the walls. It's constant now, like little claws or fingernails. I've pressed my ear against every inch of this house. The sound moves. Sometimes it's in the bedroom walls. Sometimes it's beneath the floorboards. Antoine says it's just the house settling in the cold, or perhaps mice. But mice don't whisper names. The entry for February 22nd shows a marked deterioration in Estelle's handwriting, the letters becoming jagged and pressed deeply into the paper. They aren't my children. I've known it for some time. They look like my children. They sound like my children. But something is different behind their eyes. Something cold. Something patient. I caught Jacques staring at Lyon today while the baby slept, not with brotherly affection, with hunger. On February 23rd, the entry consists of a single line, repeated over and over. The snow is sealing the house. Perhaps it's better this way. There are no entries for February 24th or 25th. The next legible entry is dated February 26th. Antoine whispers to them at night. They're plotting. I can hear them through the walls. They think I'm asleep, but I haven't truly slept in days. Whatever they become, they aren't mine anymore. None of them are. I know what I must do now. God forgive me. Tonight, everything will be quiet again. This was the final entry in Estelle's diary. What actually transpired in the chalet remains subject to speculation and debate. The official investigation, limited by the forensic techniques of 1911, concluded that Estelle Goldstein murdered her husband and 3 children before taking her own life, a tragic case of familial annihilation driven by severe mental illness. However, certain details have troubled investigators and researchers for decades. The precision of the fatal wounds, for instance. Each victim was killed with a single, powerful blow to the head, delivered with such force that Antoine's skull was fractured through to the brain. Estelle was a small woman, described as frail and weakened in the months before the tragedy. Could she have summoned the strength to deliver such devastating blows? Then there were the footprints found in the attic. Small, child-sized prints in the dust, circling the spot where Estelle was found hanging. The official report attributed them to Jacques and Margot, suggesting they had played there at some point before the killings. But several officers noted the prints appeared fresh, with no other prints overlapping them. Most disturbing was the testimony of Marcel Fournier, one of the villagers who discovered the bodies. In his initial statement, later redacted from official records but preserved in personal correspondence, he claimed, "The woman's face, Madame Goldstein, it wasn't the face of someone who died in despair. There was terror frozen in her features. And her feet, they were nearly a meter from the floor. The ceiling beam she supposedly jumped from was too low. Someone had pulled her up." As winter settled over the French Alps again in late 1911, rumors spread through the villages. Children spoke of seeing figures moving behind the windows of the abandoned chalet. Hunters reported hearing children's laughter echoing across the snow-covered slopes. The property remained empty, a silent monument to tragedy, until it was finally demolished in 1923 after a mysterious fire reduced most of it to ashes. The land where the Goldstein chalet once stood remains vacant to this day. Local residents refuse to build there. They say the ground never fully thaws, even in the height of summer. And on particularly cold February nights, when the snow falls thick and silent, those who live nearest to the site keep their shutters tightly closed. Because sometimes, they say, you can hear a woman's voice carried on the wind, not screaming, not wailing, but singing, a lullaby, soft and sweet, for children who have been dead for over a century. The snow fell relentlessly during the third week of February 1911, piling against the stone walls of the Goldstein chalet until first-floor windows were completely obscured. What had begun as a therapeutic retreat was rapidly transforming into something far more sinister, a prison of ice and shadow, sealed tight against the outside world. Dr. Jean Monfort, a specialist in psychological disorders who later studied the case, noted, "Isolation magnifies everything. Small irritations become unbearable. Slight noises grow deafening. The mind, deprived of normal stimulation, begins to create its own." According to meteorological records from the nearest weather station in Saint-Jean-de-Maurienne, the temperature dropped to an unprecedented minus 27 degrees Celsius during this period. The cold was so severe that ink froze in bottles. Water turned to ice in glasses left sitting for mere minutes. The Goldstein family would have been forced to maintain constant fires in the main hearth and the small stove in the kitchen merely to prevent freezing to death. In such conditions, sleep becomes fragmented. Dr. Monfort explained in his 1932 paper on the case. The need to tend fires throughout the night disrupts normal rest patterns. After several days, hallucinations become common, first auditory, then visual. The diary entries from this period reveal Estelle's increasing fixation on sounds within the house. On February 20th, she wrote, "The house speaks now. Not just a scratching, but words, half-formed, whispered. They come from the walls, from the chimney, from the spaces beneath the floorboards. Antoine insists it's just the wind, but the wind doesn't call you by name." Pierre Valois, one of the local men who eventually discovered the bodies, knew the mountain range intimately. In his testimony, he offered practical explanation. Those old chalets, they're never silent in winter. The beams contract in the cold. The wind finds every crack and whistles through. Ice forms inside the walls and then splits them with sounds like gunshots. A city family wouldn't be used to such things. But what happened to the Goldstein seems to have transcended ordinary mountain phenomena. By the third week of their stay, the family's routine had deteriorated significantly. According to the positions of items in the house, when it was discovered, meals were no longer being taken together at the dining table. Dirty dishes were scattered throughout the rooms. Children's toys were found in unusual places. A wooden horse on a kitchen shelf, a doll wedged behind the fireplace grate. Most telling was the configuration of sleeping arrangements. Though the chalet had 4 bedrooms, investigators found evidence that Antoine had taken to sleeping alone in the master bedroom, while Estelle apparently spent nights in a small chair beside the children's beds, or sometimes in the attic. Her diary entry from February 22nd offers a chilling explanation. "I must watch over them while they sleep. That's when the change happens. That's when whatever is pretending to be my children allows something else to surface behind their eyes." The isolation was compounded by growing tensions between Antoine and Estelle. A torn page from Antoine's personal notebook, found stuffed into a crack in the attic floorboards, reveals his mounting concern. refuses to eat with us now. She watches from the doorway while the children and I take our meals. When I approach her, she flinches. Last night, I found her standing over my bed, simply staring. When I asked what she wanted, she said, "I'm making sure it's still you. God help us. The snow shows no sign of stopping." Jacques and Margot, at 6 and 4 years old respectively, would have been particularly vulnerable to the psychological effects of extended isolation. Child psychologist Dr. Elise Laurent, who studied the case in the 1950s, observed children that age lack the emotional vocabulary to express distress. Instead, it manifests in behavior, regression, unusual play patterns, night terrors. The Goldstein children were trapped in a deteriorating situation with a mother whose grip on reality was slipping and a father increasingly preoccupied with mere survival. Evidence suggests that Jacques had begun wetting his bed again, a behavior he had outgrown years earlier. Several of his drawings were found tucked beneath his mattress, crude childish sketches of the chalet, surrounded by towering black figures with elongated limbs and no faces. On one he had written an unsteady script. "They stand in the snow and watch us." Margot's doll was found dismembered, its porcelain head carefully separated from its cloth body and placed inside a small wooden box under her pillow. When questioned about this discovery, the village priest, Father Thomas, crossed himself and murmured about old superstitions, the belief that damaged dolls could serve as decoys, drawing malevolent spirits away from their owners. The baby, Lyon, was perhaps the most affected by the changing atmosphere. According to Estelle's diary, he had stopped crying entirely by the 3rd week, an unnatural silence that terrified her more than his previous colicky wails. "He watches the ceiling now," she wrote on February 23rd. "His eyes follow something I cannot see. When I try to distract him, he looks through me as if I'm not there at all." The physical isolation of the chalet was mirrored by an emotional isolation developing within the family unit. Each member was becoming an island, separated by growing suspicion and fear. This fragmentation is precisely what specialists in family psychology identify as the precursor to tragedy. What makes the Goldstein case so disturbing, noted criminal psychologist Dr. Henri Beaumont in his analysis, is not just the final violent outcome, but the systematic breakdown of normal family bonds that preceded it. Something unraveled within those walls, something more profound than one woman's mental illness. As February drew to a close, strange incidents began to accelerate. The diary describes objects moving between rooms when no one claimed to have touched them, footprints appearing in the ash around the fireplace each morning. The family dog, a small terrier named Bijou, refused to enter certain rooms and would stand at the bottom of the attic stairs, growling at the darkness above. On February 25th, according to Estelle's increasingly erratic handwriting, Jacques reported his first direct encounter. "Jacques came to me white-faced this morning. He said the boy who visits his window spoke to him last night. When I asked what the boy said, Jacques began to cry. He said, 'Soon I can come outside and play in the snow forever.' When I asked him to describe this boy, he said, 'He looks like me, my man, but his eyes are all white like they're made of snow.'" That same night, Antoine documented a troubling incident with Margot. In a crumpled note found in his coat pocket, he wrote, "Found him standing on the kitchen table at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling. When I asked what she was doing, she said, 'The people in the attic are scratching to get out.' He believes her, claims she's been hearing the same scratching for days. When I checked the attic, there was nothing there except that damned circular window and some old trunks. The scratching began again as soon as I closed the attic door. It's just mice. It must be mice." The most concrete evidence of something truly abnormal occurring in the chalet came from an unexpected source, a passing trapper named Jean Moulins, who had taken shelter in an abandoned shepherd's hut approximately 1 kilometer from the Goldstein property during the worst of the February storms. His statement to authorities, largely dismissed at the time, has gained credibility among paranormal researchers in recent decades. It was the night of February 26. The storm had finally broken, and the moon was full and bright on the snow. I stepped outside to relieve myself and saw lights in the Goldstein chalet. Not the warm glow of lamps or fires, but cold blue light that seemed to pulse from every window simultaneously. Then I heard the singing, a woman's voice, but distorted somehow, like it was coming from underwater. The melody was no song I recognized, no French tune, nor German, nor Italian. The words, if they were words at all, were in no language of this earth. I watched for perhaps 10 minutes before the lights dimmed, just before they went out completely. I saw figures moving past the windows, tall, impossibly thin silhouettes that seemed to flow rather than walk. I made the sign of the cross and didn't sleep again that night. By morning, I had convinced myself it was a dream brought on by exhaustion. But then came news of the deaths, and I knew what I'd seen was real. Moulin's testimony was excluded from official records, attributed to superstition, and hallucinations common among solitary trappers spending too many nights alone in the mountains. Yet his description of blue light matches a peculiar detail from the crime scene. All candles and oil lamps in the chalet had been extinguished, their wicks burned to ash. Yet investigators noted an unusual blue residue inside each glass chimney, a substance that defied chemical analysis in 1911. The final hours of February 26 remained shrouded in mystery. The last coherent entry in Estelle's diary speaks of her grim resolution, but offers no specific details about what she planned. Antoine's pocket watch was found stopped at 11:42 p.m. Whether this indicates the time of his death is uncertain, as the extreme cold could have affected its mechanism. What is known with certainty is that sometime during that night, as the temperature plunged and the moon cast its cold light across the endless white landscape, something happened in the Goldstein chalet that defied rational explanation. The most troubling piece of evidence was discovered by the village priest, Father Thomas, who accompanied the search party. Beneath Antoine's body, carved into the wooden headboard of the bed in what handwriting experts would later confirm was not Estelle's script, was a single line of text. "The snow has us now." Dr. Montfort, in his final assessment of the case, wrote, "If we accept the official conclusion that Estelle Goldstein murdered her family before taking her own life, we must also accept several troubling inconsistencies. The strength required to inflict the fatal wounds, the absence of defensive injuries on any victim, the positioning of Estelle's body in the attic, suspended higher than would have been possible given the ceiling height and available furniture, and perhaps most significantly, the expression profound terror frozen on her face, not the typical presentation for suicide victims, who most commonly exhibit expressions of release or resignation. As February turns to March each year in the French Alps, locals still avoid the site where the Goldstein chalet once stood. They tell their children to come inside before dark. They hang sachets of dried herbs above their doors, an ancient protection against things that whisper in the night. And when the snow falls especially thick and silent, they listen carefully for sounds that shouldn't exist. A woman's lullaby, children's laughter, or worst of all, the soft, persistent scratching of something trying to get in. As February drew to a close, the Goldstein chalet became a world unto itself, cut off not just physically by the relentless snow, but increasingly severed from the rational order of things. The final week of the family's life remains the most enigmatic, with evidence suggesting a rapid deterioration of both conditions within the house and Estelle's mental state. Dr. René Clement, who specialized in rare psychiatric conditions at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris, reviewed the case in 1927. He concluded, "What we see in Estelle Goldstein's diary is not simply postpartum depression, but a descent into what we might term folie à deux, or rather, folie à famille, a shared psychosis that infected the entire household. The question that haunts this case is whether the psychosis was purely internal or catalyzed by external forces unique to that location." The diary entries from February 24th to 26th reveal an obsessive focus on the attic space. This small room, accessible only by a narrow staircase, appears to become the epicenter of Estelle's terror. The circular window mentioned in earlier entries faced east, overlooking the vastness of the Alpine range. According to local legends collected by folklorist Marie Devereux in the 1950s, circular windows were once believed to be spirit portals through which the dead could observe the living. "My grandmother told me about those old mountain houses with the round windows," recounted Isabelle Moreau, daughter of the caretaker who prepared the chalet for the Goldsteins' arrival. She said they were designed that way to confuse evil spirits, who could only enter through corners. But she also warned that such windows could become eyes, the eyes of the mountain itself, watching those inside. On February 24th, Estelle's diary described a disturbing incident involving the attic window. I heard the scratching again last night, louder than before. It came from the attic. When I climbed the stairs, the noise stopped. The moonlight through that cursed round window cast a perfect circle on the floor. As I watched, the circle began to fill with what looked like black water, rising up from the floorboards. I blinked, and it was gone. But the air in that room, it felt thick, like breathing through cloth soaked in ice water. That same night, according to a fragment of Antoine's notes found stuffed into his wallet, he had begun to experience his own unsettling phenomena. The children's behavior worsens daily. Jacques refuses to sleep. He sits up in bed, staring at his window, waiting for what he calls a snow boy. Margot speaks to her doll as if receiving answers. Most disturbing is Léon. At 8 months, he should not be capable of sitting upright unassisted for hours, yet I've found him this way in his crib 3 nights running, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, occasionally smiling at nothing. The house itself seemed to be changing. When investigators finally entered in late March, they noted several structural anomalies that could not be easily explained. Interior measurements of rooms did not match exterior dimensions, creating a discrepancy of nearly 2 meters along the northern wall. The main staircase had 17 steps when measured from the bottom up, but 19 when counted from top to bottom. Most bizarrely, the attic room's circular window faced east according to the house's orientation, but photographs taken from outside show it clearly visible on the southern wall. Architect Jean-Paul Mercier, who examined the remains of the structure before its demolition in 1923, wrote, "The inconsistencies in the Goldstein chalet cannot be attributed to poor construction or renovation. The original builder, Francois Goldstein, was known for precision. These spatial anomalies appear to have manifested gradually, as if the house itself had somehow warped over time." By February 25th, the family's daily routine had collapsed entirely. Meals were being taken separately, if at all. The children's sleep patterns had reversed. They were active primarily at night, lethargic and withdrawn during daylight hours. Antoine had begun barricading his bedroom door after finding 6-year-old Jacques standing beside his bed at 3 a.m., silently watching him sleep. Estelle's diary entry from that day shows a momentary return to lucidity, a desperate attempt to rationalize what was happening. "I understand now that we are all suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. The chimney must be partially blocked, allowing fumes to seep back into the house. It explains everything. The hallucinations, the children's strange behavior, Antoine's increasing paranoia. Tomorrow I will try to clear it, though the roof is dangerously iced over. No evidence suggests she ever attempted this repair. Instead, the next entry, written in jagged, pressing script that tore through the paper in places, abandons this rational explanation entirely. They're in the walls now, not just scratching, moving. I can see the plaster bulge outward when they pass by. Antoine refuses to acknowledge it. He's part of it now. They've taken him too. What happened in the chalet on February 26th, the final night, must be pieced together from fragmentary evidence, as Estelle's diary ends with her declaration that tonight, everything will be quiet again. Physical evidence documented by investigators provides some clues to the sequence of events, though many questions remain unanswered. The most complete reconstruction suggests that the family gathered for dinner around 7 p.m. Food remnants indicated a simple meal of preserved soup and bread. All 5 family members were present at the table, though Estelle apparently ate nothing. After dinner, Antoine retreated to his study, where he wrote what would be his final note, a single line scrawled on a scrap of paper. "Something moves on the roof. Too heavy for snow." Around 9 p.m., according to the position of an overturned clock, some disturbance occurred in the children's bedroom. Toys were found scattered violently across the floor. A child's handprint, later determined to belong to Margot, was found pressed into frost on the inside of the window glass, as if she had stood there watching something outside. By 10 p.m., the children had apparently been moved to the small sitting room adjacent to the kitchen. Makeshift beds had been arranged on the floor, blankets laid out in a precise circle. In the center of this circle, investigators found a peculiar arrangement of objects. 3 of Lyon's baby teeth, which should have been impossible, given his age, a lock of hair from each child, and a small cloth pouch containing what botanical experts later identified as dry belladonna and wolfsbane, plants associated in alpine folklore protection against supernatural entities, Dr. Clement noted. This arrangement suggests ritualistic thinking, common in paranoid states. Estelle appears to have been attempting to create some form of protective boundary around her children. If this was indeed her intention, it failed. Sometime between 11 p.m. and midnight, according to the medical examiner's estimate based on body temperature and rigor mortis, Jacques and Margot were killed by precise blows to the head, likely delivered with the blunt end of the fireplace axe found nearby. The lack of defensive wounds or signs of struggle indicates they were either asleep or somehow subdued when attacked. The baby, Lyon, was killed in his crib in the adjacent room. His skull showed a similar wound pattern, though the force used was necessarily less given his size. Most disturbing was the discovery that his tiny fists were clenched around small clumps of dark hair that did not match any family members, and which disappeared from the evidence collection before it could be properly analyzed. Antoine appears to have been killed in his sleep sometime after midnight. The single, powerful blow to his temple would have resulted in instant death. Peculiarly, frost had formed on his body in an unnatural pattern, radiating outward from the wound like a crystalline spiderweb, something the medical examiner confessed he had never observed before. The most enigmatic element of the crime scene was Estelle herself. Her body was discovered in the attic, hanging from a central beam by a twisted bedsheet. The investigating officer, Inspector Maurice Dupont, noted several troubling inconsistencies. The chair presumed to have been kicked away was nearly 2 meters from the body. The knot in the bedsheet was of a complex nautical variety that would have been difficult for a woman with no sailing experience to tie. Most significantly, the height of suspension was impossible. The distance from the floorboards to Madame Goldstein's feet was 1.2 meters, while the beam itself was only 1.8 meters from the floor. The physics of the scenario are, frankly, impossible. Even more disturbing were the markings found on the attic floor, beneath her suspended body. Concentric circles have been carved into the wood with some sharp implement, surrounding a central symbol that linguists and historians have never successfully identified, an angular glyph reminiscent of ancient Norse runes, but matching no known historical alphabet. The village priest, Father Thomas, refused to enter the attic after seeing the symbol. In his statement to police, he said simply, "What was in that room was not the work of God nor the madness of men. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again." Perhaps the most chilling piece of evidence was discovered 3 days after the initial investigation. A young officer, returning to the scene to collect forgotten equipment, decided to examine the mysterious circular window in the attic. Upon close inspection, he noticed what appeared to be writing etched into the frost on the inside of the glass. His official report described a child handwriting, drawn with a fingertip, spelling out 3 words, "The snow watches." When he returned with colleagues to document this finding, the message had vanished. The window was clear. This incident was subsequently struck from official records, surviving only in the officer's personal journal, discovered after his suicide in 1914. What makes the Goldstein case particularly disturbing to paranormal researchers is the pattern of phenomena reported in the area both before and after the tragedy. Local records show that the land where the chalet stood had a troubled history. In 1843, a shepherd and his entire flock of 57 sheep were found frozen to death despite taking shelter in a cave during relatively mild weather. In 1878, 2 hikers disappeared in the vicinity during summer. Their equipment later discovered arranged in a perfect circle on the ground, with no footprints leading away from the site. After the Goldstein murders, the pattern continued. In 1919, a group of mountaineers sought emergency shelter in the abandoned chalet during a sudden snowstorm. Only 3 of the 5 survived the night. The survivors described waking to find their companions standing at the attic window, staring out at the storm. When called to, they did not respond. By morning, both had vanished, no footprints in the snow, no trace of their passage. Only their empty boots remained, placed neatly at the front door. Dr. Emil Weber, a Swiss psychologist who studied Mount phenomena, proposed in 1933 what he called alpine isolation syndrome, a condition unique to remote mountain dwellings. There is something about the combination of extreme isolation, the disorienting whiteness of snow, and the thin mountain air that creates a perfect storm for psychological breakdown, he wrote. The mind, deprived of normal stimuli, begins to create its own reality. In extreme cases, this shared hallucination can manifest physical effects, psychosomatic symptoms that appear supernatural in nature. Yet Weber's rational explanation fails to account for all the evidence in the Goldstein case. It cannot explain the impossible positioning of Estelle's body, the unidentified hair found in baby Lyon's fist, or the structural anomalies in the chalet itself. Marie Devereux, the folklorist who collected local legends about the site in the 1950s, offered a different perspective. The old people in these villages don't speak of the Goldstein tragedy as an isolated incident. They see it as part of a pattern stretching back centuries. They have a name for the phenomenon in their dialect, le blanc que prend, the white that takes. They believe there are places in the mountains where the snow itself becomes conscious, hungry, where it watches through windows and waits for isolation to weaken the human mind before it enters. As the investigation concluded in April 1911, the official report cited homicide followed by suicide, precipitated by severe mental illness exacerbated by isolation. The case was closed, the chalet sealed, the dead buried in a small cemetery in Chabris with little ceremony. Antoine's business associates, uncomfortable with the scandal, rarely spoke of the family again. Within a decade, the Goldstein tragedy had faded from public memory, becoming just another dark footnote in alpine history. But in the villages near Saint-Jean-de-Maurienne, the story never died. It lives on in warnings passed from parents to children. Never stare too long at the snow. Never build homes with circular windows. Never remain in the mountains when the deep winter comes. Because sometimes in the silence of February night, when the snow falls thick and silent under a full moon, the mountain doesn't just watch. It hungers. The night of February 26, 1911, marked the culmination of whatever malevolence had been building within the walls of the Goldstein chalet. The forensic evidence, though limited by the standards of the time, provides a chilling timeline of the family's final hours. Dr. Pascal Renaud, who performed the autopsies, noted, "The precision of the fatal wounds suggests not frenzied attacks, but calculated execution. Each victim received a single blow to the head, delivered with such force that death would have been instantaneous. The angle and depth of impact indicate the assailant stood directly over each victim, striking downward with tremendous power. The children died first. Jacques and Margot were found on their makeshift beds in the sitting room, still in their night clothes, positioned side by side as if arranged for viewing. Their eyes were open, expressions frozen in what the initial police report described as peaceful surprise. No signs of struggle were present. The blood spatter was minimal, confined to small halos around their wounds, suggesting their hearts had already slowed or stopped before the fatal blows. The temperature in the house that night was estimated at minus 15 degrees Celsius inside, noted meteorologist Francois Bonnet in his assessment. Without adequate heating, the human body begins to shut down. Paradoxically, in the final stages of hypothermia, victims often experience a sensation of burning heat, removing their clothes despite freezing conditions. This phenomenon might explain one case's most disturbing details. Jacques and Margot had been carefully tucked under blankets, but investigation revealed their night clothes were soaking wet, as if they had been sweating profusely before death. Analysis later showed the liquid was not sweat, but melted snow, despite no snow being found inside the sitting room. Baby Lyon died in his crib in the adjacent nursery. Unlike his siblings, his body showed signs of movement after death. His position had shifted, tiny fingers clutching at the wooden bars of his crib. Most unnervingly, a partial handprint too large to belong to an infant was found pressed into frost on the inside of the nursery window. Fingerprint analysis, primitive in 1911, could only determine it matched neither Antoine nor Estelle. Antoine Goldstein died in his bed, apparently while sleeping. The bedroom door, which he had taken to barricading at night, according to his notes, showed no signs of forced entry. Yet the wooden chair propped against the doorknob was found intact, still in position, as if whoever entered had passed through without disturbing it. The fatal wound to Monsieur Goldstein's head is inconsistent with the theorized weapon, Dr. Renaud observed in his report. While the children's injuries match the dimensions of the fireplace axe, the wound on Antoine's skull is wider, with a distinctive curved impression that matches no tool found in the chalet. The most significant anomaly involved the ambient temperature surrounding Antoine's body. While the rest of the house had frozen solid, a circular area around his bed remained inexplicably warmer, approximately 5 degrees Celsius, according to the investigators' thermometers. This thermal anomaly persisted for hours after the discovery, defying the bitter cold that had preserved the other bodies. Inspector Dupont's official report states, Monsieur Goldstein's expression suggests he may have awakened at the moment of attack. His eyes were open, his face contorted in what can only be described as terror. His right hand was extended outward, fingers curled as if grasping at something or someone at his bedside. Estelle Goldstein's death remains the most enigmatic. Her body, discovered in the attic, presented investigators with an impossible scenario. The official explanation, that she hanged herself after murdering her family, contradicts multiple pieces of physical evidence. Dr. Renaud noted, the ligature marks on Madame Goldstein's neck are inconsistent with hanging. Rather than the typical upward angle compression seen in suicides, the bruising forms a complete circle of uniform pressure, suggesting the ligature was applied horizontally, as if she had been strangled before being suspended. More troubling was the condition of her hands. Under her fingernails, investigators found splinters and fragments of wood, consistent with someone who had clawed desperately at a wooden surface. The source of these splinters was identified as the attic's circular window frame, suggesting Estelle had tried to escape through this opening, an impossibility given its small diameter of barely 40 centimeters. The evidence suggests Madame Goldstein died fighting for her life, concluded Dr. Renaud, not by her own hand as initially presumed. The most disturbing aspect of the scene was discovered by Father Thomas, who accompanied the search party. The priest's account, subsequently stricken from official records but preserved in his personal correspondence, described finding a message written in frost on the inside of the attic's circular window. She tried to save them. When other investigators went to document this message, the window was clear, the frost having mysteriously melted despite the sub-zero temperatures. What actually happened on that final night? The physical evidence offers conflicting narratives, but reconstruction based on diary entries and forensic findings suggests a sequence both tragic and terrifying. By evening on February 26, Estelle Goldstein had reached a breaking point. Her diary's final entry, "Tonight, everything will be quiet again," has been interpreted as a resolution to end the family's suffering. But subtle evidence suggests her intent may have been protective rather than murderous. The circle of blankets in which Jacques and Margot were found contained elements consistent with folk protective rituals, small pouches of salt at cardinal points, strands of hair from each family member woven together, and most significantly, a page torn from the family Bible containing Psalm 91. You will not fear the terror of night. Dr. Helena Schmidt, a forensic psychologist who reviewed the case in 1975, proposed an alternative scenario. The evidence suggests Estelle was attempting to protect her children from something she believed was in the house. The ritualistic arrangements point not to homicidal intent, but to desperate maternal defense against a perceived supernatural threat. The physical evidence supports this interpretation. The children's beds have been moved from their bedroom to the sitting room, the only room in the house with no external windows. The doorways have been lined with salt. A crude symbol, later identified as an ancient alpine protective mark, had been carved into each doorframe. Most tellingly, investigators found a journal page crumpled in the fireplace, partially burned but still legible. Written in Estelle's hand, it contained a frantic prayer. God, protect us. They are inside now. They wear our faces, but they are not us. If anyone finds this, know that I tried. Know that what you will find is not my doing, but theirs. They come through the snow. They come through the glass. They... The text ended abruptly, as if she had been interrupted. What followed appears to have been a swift and methodical slaughter. Based on body temperature and lividity, Dr. Renaud estimated the children died between 11 p.m. and midnight, Antoine shortly thereafter, and Estelle last sometime between 1 and 2 a.m. the weapon used on the children, the fireplace axe, was found beside their bodies, wiped clean of blood, and laid out with ceremonial precision. Yet it showed no fingerprints, despite several clear prints being found on other objects Estelle had touched that evening. Antoine's death presents even greater inconsistencies. The bedroom door remained barricaded from the inside, the window securely shuttered against the storm. The wound that killed him matched no implement found in the house. Most bizarrely, a circle of frost had formed on the floor around his bed, crystalline patterns radiating outward from a central point, as if the wood itself had frozen from within. As for Estelle, the evidence suggests she fled to the attic after witnessing or committing the deaths below. The narrow staircase showed signs of desperate ascent, broken fingernails embedded in the wood, a torn piece of her nightgown caught on a nail. The attic door had been barricaded from within, a heavy trunk pushed against it. Yet something had reached her nonetheless. The circular window, too small for human passage, had been shattered outward, fragments of glass found in the snow below. The temperature in the attic was recorded at minus 29 degrees Celsius, colder than outside the house, defying physical laws of thermodynamics. Most chilling was the condition of Estelle's body. Though officially ruled a suicide, the physical evidence told a different story. Her feet dangled 1.2 meters above the floor, while the beam from which she hung was only 1.8 meters high, a physical impossibility. The knot in the bedsheet was a complex sailor's knot that Estelle, with no nautical experience, would have been unlikely to tie. And then there were her eyes. Dr. Renault's autopsy notes, sealed for 50 years after the incident, described them as crystallized, the corneas frozen in a state unlike anything in medical literature, as if the very fluid had transformed to ice while she lived. In the decades following the tragedy, multiple theories have emerged to explain the inexplicable elements of the Goldstein case. Carbon monoxide poisoning, ergot fungus contamination of their food supply, shared psychosis exacerbated by isolation. All have been proposed and subsequently dismissed as insufficient to account for the totality of evidence. The locals have their own explanation, passed down through generations. They speak of les blancs, entities neither living nor dead that dwell in the deepest snowdrifts of the Alps. According to legend, these beings can enter homes through any opening where snow might blow, keyholes, cracks in windows, chimney flues, but prefer circular portals, which they see as invitations. They come first as whispers, explained Marie Dufour, an elderly resident interviewed in 1967, then as movements glimpsed from a corner of the eye, then as perfect imitations of those you love, wearing their faces like masks. By the time you realize what's happening, it's too late. They've already replaced everyone but you. Whatever occurred in the Goldstein chalet on that February night in 1911, one fact remains undisputed. When spring came and the snow finally melted from around the property, investigators made a final, disturbing discovery. Circling the house, in the muddy earth revealed by the receding snow, were footprints, hundreds of them, forming a perfect ring around the chalet. All faced inward, as if whatever had made them had stood in silent vigil, watching. All were bare human feet, despite the killing cold, and all were the same size, small like a child's. They had no source and no destination. They simply began and ended in the snow, a circle of impossible watchers surrounding a house of death. To this day, in the villages near Saint-Jean-de-Maurienne, parents bring their children inside before the February dusk. They close their shutters tight against the night, and they tell their little ones never to answer if they hear someone calling their name from outside when the snow is falling. Because sometimes what calls to you in a voice you recognize is not what it appears to be, and the snow has a hunger all its own. The discovery of the Goldstein family on March 27, 1911, forever changed the quiet villages surrounding Saint-Jean-de-Maurienne. The search party, Pierre Valois, Marcel Fournier, Henri Dubois, and Father Thomas, found something more disturbing than mere death in that isolated chalet. We knew something was wrong immediately, Valois later recounted. No tracks in the snow, not even animal prints. In the mountains, that's unnatural. Around the Goldstein chalet, the snow lay perfect and untouched, as if nothing living had passed there in weeks. The temperature inside barely exceeded the freezing exterior, fires long extinguished. What struck the men first was a silence, a profound absence that seemed to swallow even their footsteps. It was like entering a tomb, Father Thomas wrote in his journal, not just because of the bodies, but because the very air felt dead. Words spoken aloud seemed to travel no further than our lips before disappearing. The bodies revealed a nightmarish tableau. The children in the sitting room, Antoine in his bed, Estelle hanging in the attic, each perfectly preserved by the cold, expressions frozen in their final moments. Dr. Victor Moreau, the regional medical examiner, noted, "In 30 years of practice, I have never encountered corpses so well-preserved yet so troubling. The extreme cold had prevented decomposition entirely, creating an unsettling scene of death that appeared to have occurred only hours rather than weeks before." The official report, filed on April 3rd, concluded, "Deaths resulted from homicide committed by Estelle Goldstein upon her husband and children, followed by suicide, precipitated by severe melancholia and isolation-induced psychosis." This explanation satisfied distant authorities, but failed to convince locals, who noted glaring inconsistencies. "The weapon makes no sense," insisted Fournier years later. "They claim Madame Goldstein used a fireplace axe, yet her slight build makes it implausible she could deliver such devastating blows. Moreover, Antoine's wound didn't match the axe, something the report conveniently omits. More troubling were phenomena reported during the investigation that never made official documents. 3 officers reported hearing children's laughter when no children were present. Items moved between rooms without explanation. And according to Father Thomas's sealed testimony, the persistent smell of fresh snow lingered inside the attic, even after weeks of spring thaw. The Goldstein bodies were transported to Chabris for burial. The funeral sparsely attended, the family name quickly fading from public memory as business associates worked to avoid scandal. The chalet remained abandoned until summer, when Antoine's cousin Henri arrived from Paris to settle the estate. Despite the valuable alpine land, not a single buyer could be found. "The place has a shadow on it now," explained local estate agent Jean Moreau. "Not just a tragedy. There are stories. Strange lights through windows at night, sounds of children playing when the house stands empty. Local men refused to approach it for any sum. The structure stood empty for 12 years, becoming a dark landmark avoided by all. Shepherds reported their flocks would refuse to pass near it. Hunting dogs would growl and retreat rather than approach. The chalet might have remained indefinitely had it not burned on February 26, 1923, exactly 12 years after the Goldstein deaths. The fire consumed the building with unnatural speed despite heavy snow. Firefighters reported bizarre characteristics: blue-white flames instead of orange, and despite intense heat that melted metal fixtures, the snow within 5 meters remained frozen solid. Fire Chief Maurice Laurent reported, "As the roof collapsed, we distinctly heard what sounded like children laughing, followed by a woman's scream, emanating from within the flames themselves." The land has remained vacant for over a century. Attempts to rebuild have consistently failed. In 1935, an industrialist purchased a plot for a hunting lodge. Construction began, but workers abandoned the project after reporting tools disappearing, unexplained cold spots, and footsteps in fresh cement. In 1952, a geological survey team established a temporary camp on the site. They departed after 3 nights, their official report citing equipment malfunctions. The lead researcher's private correspondent, however, described severe nightmares experienced by all team members, consistently featuring children standing in snow, watching with eyes like frozen milk. The Goldstein case might have remained obscure had it not been for Dr. Emil Weber, a Swiss psychologist who investigated the tragedy in 1932. His paper, The Goldstein Incident, Psychological Deterioration in Extreme Isolation, brought academic attention to the case. Weber attributed the bizarre elements to carbon monoxide poisoning, ergot contamination in their food, and psychological stress from extended isolation. "What we see is a perfect storm of environmental, psychological, and toxic factors creating conditions for extreme breakdown," he wrote. This rational explanation satisfied academics, but failed to address troubling elements: the temperature anomalies throughout the house, the impossible positioning of Estelle's body, the unidentified hairs in baby Lyon's fist, and the pattern of similar incidents in the region. In 1967, paranormal investigator Marie Devereux published White Death, Alpine Manifestations, and the Goldstein Case. Her research uncovered 7 incidents between 1850 and 1965, with striking similarities. Each case involved a family isolated by winter conditions. Each reported hearing scratching from within walls. Each described children behaving abnormally, speaking to unseen entities, staring at empty corners. And in each case, death came suddenly, with at least one victim found in a position that defied physical explanation. Devereux introduced a concept of less blanks to wider audiences, local folklore regarding entities that inhabit deep snowdrifts, able to imitate human appearance, but not perfectly replicate behavior. The locals have a test, she wrote. If you suspect someone is not who they appear to be, offer them salt. The real person will take it normally. These entities will recoil. They cannot tolerate salt, cannot cross thresholds lined with it. This explains why the Goldstein children were found within a circle of salted blankets. Estelle was trying to protect them. Modern analysis is limited by lost evidence. Original police files were largely destroyed during World War II. Physical evidence vanished when the Chabris Police Repository flooded in 1957. Dr. Josephine Mercier, a forensic psychologist specializing in family annihilation, offered a contemporary assessment in 2018. The Goldstein case contains elements consistent with maternal filicide suicide driven by psychotic depression, but also presents anomalies that resist classification. The precision of the fatal wounds and positioning of bodies suggests a methodical approach inconsistent with frenzied psychosis. Perhaps most compelling are testimonies from those who have visited the site recently. The land remains a barren patch amid otherwise verdant landscape. Vegetation grows poorly, snow melts more slowly, and animals avoid the area entirely. In 2005, researcher Jacques Fontaine conducted the first scientific investigation using modern equipment. His findings documented several anomalies. Ground temperature averaging 7 degrees Celsius cooler than surrounding areas despite identical conditions. Audio recordings capturing unexplained tapping sounds at precise 23-second intervals. And snow samples containing crystalline structures with 7 points rather than the standard 6, a formation meteorologists confirmed is physically impossible. The final piece emerged in 2010, when renovation of the St. Jean-Maurienne Church uncovered a sealed box beneath the altar. Inside was a letter from Father Thomas, with instructions to remain unopened for 100 years. His testimony reads, "What I witnessed was not human madness alone. When we found Estelle, I observed something the official report omits. Her shadow on the wall did not match her body's position. While she hung vertically, the shadow moved horizontally. When I approached, the temperature dropped so severely my breath froze. And though her eyes were glazed with frost, I swear they tracked my movement across the room." He concluded, "I do not know what entered the house during those long February nights. I know only that it wore the snow like we were clothes, that it mimicked those it took, and left nothing but empty shells arranged in a grotesque tableau. Something ancient dwells in the deepest winter of these mountains. Something that hungers not for flesh, but for the warmth of human souls." Today, the Goldstein tragedy remains officially classified as a murder-suicide attributed to mental illness, the explanation that satisfies bureaucratic requirements. Yet in the villages surrounding St. Jean-de-Maurienne, a different understanding prevails. When winter descends, locals still hang protective sachets of salt above their doors. They avoid circular windows. They warn children never to stare too long at snow when it falls thick and silent under a full moon, because in those crystalline depths, something might be staring back. And if it learns your face well enough, it might decide to wear it. The site where the Goldstein chalet stood remains vacant. Hikers sometimes report seeing 4 figures in the clearing, a man, a woman, and 2 children, watching with eyes like frozen stars. By morning, only footprints remain.